Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining today's live broadcast where we're going to be looking at a quick wildlife edit. That's the plan for today. Wildlife is always interesting just because often you're dealing with fast-moving subjects, shallow depth of field. You want to make those details nice and crisp and so on and so forth, but without introducing noise elsewhere. So the shot we're going to look at today is one from Mark Smith. He's a Sony photographer, so kindly lent us some images to work with, and this is how it looks out of camera. So the way we're going to deal with this is to kind of do some localized sharpening for reasons which you'll see in a minute. So thanks for joining again today, and don't forget to give us a shout out in the comments where you're coming from, and I'll have a few other messages to deliver to you as the session goes on. So first of all, let's just have a look at the image in its entirety. So we can see, if we just zoom in, relatively nice and sharp. I don't know what camera it was shot on. Let's take a look. 600mm, nice and long, A7R Mark IV. So plenty of megapixels to play with as well, and lots of decent details too. So loads of good raw data. All right, so before we do anything else, obviously dealing with fast-moving subject like this, did much better than I ever could. The framing isn't perfect, but we've got plenty of megapixels to play with. So I'm going to grab the crop tool and just isolate, without chopping his or her wings off, a little bit closer like so. Maybe we could afford to cut a tiny bit. Anyway, so that's the crop I'm going to settle with. Now for the first adjustments, we're going to worry about sharpening and all those other things a little bit later, but the first adjustments, we can see that it's a little bit underexposed. It's a bit harder to go by the histogram in this case because we've got all the blue sky going on, so we're going to get slightly wacky results from that, but it definitely does need a bit of brightening up overall, just a touch. And then I'm going to see what auto levels does. I don't want it to clip the feathers too much, so let's do auto levels, turn on our exposure warnings, and we're just losing a little bit on our unfortunate breakfast, lunch or dinner here, but everything else is holding on detail wise, so that's good, because I certainly wouldn't want to lose any details in the feathers or anything like that. Now just for a word on the exposure warnings, you can set these up to your own preferences. Let me just, sorry, my sound monitor was a bit loud. You can set these up to your own preferences, and you can see here I've got my warnings kicking in at 250 and 4. So even though I am seeing a bit of red speckled on the cheeks, I guess, of the fish here, actually if I went to 255, you know, it's almost negligible. But I tend to turn it down a little bit just so I can see when it's starting to pop in. And the same goes, we can just see the shadow warnings creeping in there, but it's nothing drastic for me to worry about. So just, if you didn't know that, in your preferences, you can set those parameters for the warnings. So how are we looking now? So a little bit better density wise. It's still kind of a bit on the muddy side. So let's chuck in a bit more contrast. Now we have to be a bit more mindful of our shadows. And I'll just add in a bit of clarity as well. Now, again, should I be worried about these blacks? If I hover my cursor over the top, we've still got some detail there, but I might just raise up my blacks just a tiny bit as well. So how are we looking? Let's turn off the exposure warnings to remind ourselves where we started. Alt click on our reset button. You can see before and after like so. Now feathers on the chest, I might want to bring a bit more detail back into those. So let's see what highlights does. So we can just bring those down a little bit because there's lots of nice detail there. And our whites, it's kind of, the whites isn't having a huge amount of effect. Remember, that's right on the upper scale of the histogram, and we actually don't have a great deal of information there. So whites is not having a massive amount of effect, whereas highlights is. So if we just click and hold on highlights, you can see before and after, and that's just bringing a little bit more detail back into that section. Let's go to 200 for you guys. So without our highlight recovery, you can see before and after. Now, breakfast here is just kind of losing the edge of its sharpness a little bit. Got all this fantastic detail here as well. So let's see if we can enhance that a little bit. Now the obvious thing to do is with some sharpening or structure, and also if we look around again, I'll go to 200 so you guys can see better, and like the eye and the beak, and there's all kinds of nice detail here. But right now if I start to try and up the sharpening a bit, so let's just aggressively do that. Let's push the sharpening a bit more, and let's also exaggerate our structure a bit more. You see in the blue sky, and I'm going over the top here just so it's clear on the transmission, that when we're adding in our sharpening and structure, we've got a danger of it creeping into the blue sky as well. Now there's no point putting any sharpening in the blue or structure because it's just going to add noise. So let's reset that terrible adjustment with structure. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put sharpening right down to 0. You can see how much softer it got. So the default is around here, and then 0 is down there. So what I'm going to do is just target our sharpening, and we can make a combo of where we need it the most. Now if we go back to the default and push this up a little bit more, always worth seeing. Let's see if we can deal with this without having to do any layers. Now when I tried playing with this yesterday, I did do a sharpening layer, but what we might be able to do is if I bring up the halo suppression, then what this does, halo sup, it's kind of hard to read the name of the tool, but at 0, you can see when you start to sharpen a bit more aggressively, we see these high contrast shadows. Or high contrast sort of areas around edges like this. Now halo suppression will help to kill those, but also keep some sharpness or life in the shot as well. So if we look at before and after, we're getting some sharpening. Just if I click that, you can just see it change slightly around the beak. Halo suppression, that's getting rid of some of that nastier stuff. Now if I push up the threshold, that might also clean up the sky a bit, but at the expense of perhaps losing some other detail like in the white feathers. Because what the threshold is doing is just stopping sharpening of neighboring pixels that are of a similar density and color, for example. So yes, you can play around with all these different sliders, but it might be easier if we just kind of target our sharpening into where we want it, because not all of the bird is in focus. So you see it's just coming out of focus here. No point sharpening that. Our fish friend here is pretty sharp. It's just hanging on. Lots of nice detail here. You can see water droplets. So there's lots of elements that we could sharpen up quite nicely, but no point sharpening the sky. So let's put sharpening to 0 and let's make a new filled layer. So if I press M on my keyboard, that's going to show me that the whole shot is masked, like so. So now we've got an adjustment layer to play with. So now we can use a combination of sharpness, structure, those kinds of things to see exactly what's going to make all those details pop out. So pretty good spot was kind of, and I'll go to 200 again for your guys' benefit, pretty good spot was around here. So I'm going to put the default sharpening back in for this camera, which is around 200. We might be able to push it a little bit more. So I'm going to go slightly more, and then also on our structure we can lift that up a bit. Now structure is a great tool for enhancing fine details like this, so edge definition, fur, this kind of structure, architectural details, and so on and so forth. So if I turn the layer on and off, so let's kill that layer, that's before, so we don't see much separation in the feathers here. If we turn that layer back on, now we can see it's a lot better. But we're getting the hard edges and the noise is creeping back into the blue and so on. So really we just want to kind of target it in one particular area. And certainly it doesn't make sense to have much sharpening applied here. It's starting to bring out the noise in this area too. So right now, if you remember, we had the whole shot has that layer is over the whole shot. So that's layer 1. Let's just call this our sharpening. Sharpening. Issue with spelling. And let's right click and clear that mask. Now that will get rid of that mask, but it will keep my sharpening and structure points intact as well. So let's do that too. So now if we zoom back in, let's go a bit closer. Now we can grab a brush, and now effectively we've created ourselves, whoops, brush was a bit big there. We've created ourselves a sharpening brush. So then we're free to just kind of paint this in wherever we like. Now I'm going to hide my mask. So you see how when I'm brushing it, then the sharpness is popping in. Now again, that might be a bit too much and a bit too aggressive. So let's clear that mask again and right click, and we're going to turn flow down, and that's going to allow us to build up the mask. So flow is a percentage adjustment. So on 10, it's going to build up the mask in 10% brush strokes or passes of the mouse. Same principle. So if we go back and forth a little bit, then we can build up the sharpening where we want. I'm mindful that I don't want to get into the blue sky, so I'm going to make my brush a bit smaller and just kind of carefully paint around these areas. Let's move over to the feathers, can make the brush a bit bigger, and then I can bring back the detail here. I'll turn the layer on and off in a second so you can see better. We're just holding on to the focus here, so that's fine. Down here we can bring that in a little bit more as well. And then our breakfast here, unfortunate guy, we can bring in that nice detail back on the scales and so on. Now we're just off the focus plane here, but we can probably afford a little bit of sharpening around there. And down here as well, along the wings, we can bring some details back in, like so. So really, we're just kind of painting in the sharpness where it makes sense. Let's see. Okay. Okay, pretty happy with that. Now, you would be doing this at 100%. I just wanted to make sure you could see what was going on. So if we turn that layer off, so let's kill that layer. So that's the layer off and the layer back on. Let's go over to, where was it nice and sharp? It was down here on the feathers. You can even see like the little lines and everything, quite spectacular. So if we turn the sharpening off and back on, now we start to see that separation and so on without any of the negative impacts of sharpening anything else. Now to see that, how that mask actually looks, if you were doing this, you might want to spend a bit more time. But if I press M, you can see the mask, so you can see where it's been painted. And if there's any gaps, of course, we could fill that in, so we know this guy is nice and sharp. And if you look here, you can see a grayscale mask. So this basically shows us where the mask has been painted in. Now you see it's a little bit kind of circular there. It's probably because my flow was maybe a bit high and the brush not quite soft enough. So I'd go a smaller, softer brush and slightly smaller, and then we just kind of clean up those areas as well, like so. So that's the kind of sharpening map that we almost end up with. So now we're really kind of critically placing it where it makes sense. And then the blue sky, it's not going to print with any nastiness should we print this out. Just saw a quick question whiz past. So Chorban says, how do you change the size of the brush? Sorry, Chorban. So when we are brushing, if you do a control click, like so, or a right click, depending what you have access to on the mouse or keyboard, then you get up this brush panel. If we go over here, you've got two little slider buttons, and you can bring those up as well. But I find right clicking much easier, or you can use a whole raft of shortcut keys to do the same thing, but I don't tend to use shortcut keys in these demos because it makes it very, very hard to follow. Okay, what am I going to do to finish? Let's add another layer, and this one's going to be a radial mask. So this guy here, draw radial gradient mask, just to do ever such a slight vignette. So outer line is where the mask has faded to 0. Inner line is 50%. Let's turn the mask on. Middle line is 50. Inner line is 0. So I want to hover over the middle line and rotate my mask something more like this. And also make it much more feathered. I just want a very subtle vignette, essentially. So M again to hide my mask, and let's just bring this down like just a tiny bit, not much, maybe even that's too much, like so. So just a little bit. I might just brighten up our center bird a bit more and then go back and bring this down a little bit too. Don't want much, just ever such a small hint, like so. Now there's a dust splat down here, just noticed. That's annoying. So let's do another quick layer, which is going to be a heel layer. I'm going to grab my brush, make this a bit smaller, and then option click. That just sets my source point, and then we're going to brush away here, and that will just get rid of that annoying dust spot and make our shot much more cleaner. There we go. So to remind ourselves how we started, alt click on reset, and then you can see before and after, like so. Now if we zoom into 100%, well, let's go to 200 for the benefit of the internet and say before, so that's how it came out of camera, and then after, like so. Now if you think it's a bit bright to here, I might just dodge that down a little bit, but I actually think you can still see the feather separation, the different tonal ranges, nothing's blown out, so I'm pretty happy with that as well. Cool, let's have a look at a few questions. Let's see. How is sharpness, Adnan was asking, is different from clarity. So remember, clarity is a contrast adjustment. I mean, sharpness is a kind of contrast adjustment in a way. But what clarity does is increase or decrease contrast. So if we go back to the background layer, contrast is on 10. So if I push contrast up to the max and down, obviously you can see what's going on. If we do a similar thing with clarity, then it's also increasing contrast, but it's more targeted to the midtones. So you'll see if you're heavy-handed with contrast, your blacks get very dark very quickly, and the whites tend to blow out. So contrast you need to be a bit mindful for. So clarity, a great way for making the image pop, but for not kind of destroying your shadows and highlights. Sharpening, again, that's a kind of a contrast adjustment, but at a micro level, if you like. But it's doing, you know, in a way, a similar thing as well. That's a good question from Michael. Could you divide the sky blue into white without affecting exposure? Don't know if we could make it white. If we go to our color editor, let's just find, where's my color editor gone? I've got rid of it. So right click to add my color editor, for example. If we, well, let's just click on, let's go for the advanced actually. So if we make sure we've got our full range of blues and we take saturation down, we could take the color out of it. If we bring lightness up, we could make it brighter. Now it's not, it's almost it's a kind of 220 points. It actually looks fairly realistic. So I don't know if that was the kind of look you were going for. Who was that asking? I think that was Michael, wasn't it? Yes. Just put your name up again, Michael. Actually, I might quite like that. So if we turn the blue on and off, I don't know, personal choice. Now, if you want that brighter still, we could click here and say create mask layer from selection. So that will create a mask based on the blue sky. But I don't know, I just want to see if it's picked up any tones in the bird itself. Yeah, it's kind of killing a little bit in its feathers, as you see coming through here. So what we could do, if we just maybe, we could play with our saturation range a bit, but without going into too much detail, you could achieve something like that. And also you can create a mask from the color selection, and then we could bump up exposure a little bit more, maybe modify the mask slightly as well. But I think because we've got that little bit of blue going on in the feathers here, when we take the saturation out, see, it's just kind of killing that as well, and a bit on the fish as well. But if we created a mask, we could probably modify that to some extent too. Nice. Let's see. just looking at your questions. I'm flying solo today, so I might be a bit slower than usual. I don't have my colleague assisting me in the background, so I'm slightly inefficient without it, of course. What does Han say? Do you always use paint to create a mask, or can you select the sky and invert the selection to create a mask for the eagle and fish? Well, you could do exactly what we were just doing, but without that issue. So let's actually do that. If we say create mask layer from selection, let's go back to our layers and take a couple of seconds. If I press M, and somebody was asking where the grayscale mask is, it's here, Alt M. So that's the mask that's been created. So it's not bad. So what we could do is grab our plus brush and we could fill in some of the gaps. Sorry, we could delete some of those gaps. So erase, which is this one here, and we could just take out some of this because we don't want our fish to be affected, and sort of down here. And if you have more time, we could critically sort of paint in a little bit, or we might be able to use a luminosity mask as well. Lots of different techniques we could do, but I'll also right click because the mask is a bit crude, and we can say refine mask, and this will just make the mask a little bit more what's the word, less crude, I guess. We'll wrap around a bit nicer. See, it's less binary now than it was before. So we've got our mask for the bird or the sky, and we could clean that up a bit. And if you wanted to invert that, what you can actually do is if I make a new layer, so let's call this one sky, and what we could do on this one is copy our mask from the sky, so that would just do an exact copy. So we've got the same thing again, and then we could right click and invert that, and then we've got bird, like so. So you could use that for your sharpening too, if you want. We could argue which one is quicker or not, but that's a couple of different alternatives. So I hadn't thought of doing that myself. So yeah, good suggestions. Now on our sky, if we took saturation down to 0 and then brought brightness up perhaps, then we could sort of change that, or maybe just desaturate, depending what you prefer. I'd just be mindful of a couple of these areas you might want to go in with a slightly sort of finer brush and just figure those out. But lots of different scope for change there. Helps, of course, that the sky is a nice sort of even blue, and this guy doesn't have so much blue going on in his body and so on. So a couple of good techniques there. Thanks for those questions. Unsung hero, stunning stuff. I'm ditching Lightroom now. Woo! Cheers for the unsung hero, for sure. So I hope that answers your question, Michael, as well. Sebastian, we answered your question. Where is the grey mask option? Just a reminder, it's here, or Alt M. Very handy, just for certainly for those techniques like refining the mask and so on. There's our bird, there's our sky. So just refining, it's a lot easier to work with the grayscale mask, for example. Let's see, and that's a good question. So, which Isabel asked, and thank you, Terry, for answering. So the difference between Sony version and Fuji version is that they're just for those specific cameras. Capture One Pro, identical, except it covers all the camera models that we support as well. Let's see, a few people asking about printings, so printing sessions. Yeah, it's a bit tricky to print when I don't have a printer or be able to show you the print, but let's see if we can. I'll try to think of something creative that we could do as well. Okay, the next lesson Andrea was asking, so let's see what we can do. Okay, the next lesson that we're going to talk about, just checking my keynotes messages here, so it's going to be on Monday. There's a link in the description, I think. If not, I'm going to add one, but I'm pretty sure there's a link in the description. So on Monday, it's an edit with us. So we're going to give away the raw file that you guys can play with as well. The shot, I'm not sure if I've got it on this database. Let's just have a look. Not in this collection, but it's quite a tricky one because I took it, so it's not very good in terms of exposure and all those things. So there's lots of scope for local adjustments, fixing white balance, local stuff, and so on. And then the raw file will be up for download as well. So if you have a go editing, make sure you show that please on Instagram as well. We also have a Capture One group called Capture One Creative Lab where you could share those edits too. We'd love to see them. And finally, we currently have 25% off all our licenses too. That's ending at the end of April. So if you're not a Capture One user, then it's currently 25% off as well. So now is a good time to buy as well. Okay, now I'm going to check for a last few questions. Renault was asking, is it recording? Yes, so it'll be, you can kind of watch it immediately after it's finished if you like. Sometimes it takes YouTube a little while to get it ready, but it's on YouTube and Facebook pretty much as soon as it's done as well. Just going to have a quick scan for the last two questions. How about another lesson on tethering? Yeah, we could do a crash course, a quick crash course. That's a good idea as well. And let's see, I'm going to pick one more and then we can go on for the rest of our days, I would think. I think we pretty much answered most of them. Let's see. Yeah, I think we are pretty much good. We've covered most of those. What did Bill have to say? There we go. If I wanted to change the depth of blue on the sky for better contrast. Hopefully, Bill, you saw that with our, now we have a myriad of layers. This is why you should always name your layers, because I can't remember what each ones of these are doing. Oh, that was just my radial mask. So we should name that radial. The heel layer was getting rid of our dot, and we have our sky layer like so. Yeah, so right now we've kind of messed around with the saturation, but we could make it a little bit darker. We could go all kinds of different ways with this, really. So we could even make it bluer too. Lots of scope for various different changes. So whether you like it monochrome or super blue, that's up to you. But that's how we started. Let's finish off by looking at a new variant, which is just a virtual copy. So that's what I did yesterday. That's what we did today with a ton of layers. And then that's how we started. So all kinds of different ways that we could have taken this image. And I really don't know what I prefer. So there we go. Thanks to Mark Smith for lending us the shot as well. Couldn't do these things without the kind generosity and cooperation with photographers too. All right, thanks everybody for joining us again today. Have a great weekend. Hope the sun is shining where you are, and we'll see you all again on Monday. I very much hope you can join us then as well. Take care and see you soon. Bye now.